And so I have brought a lot of quilts for you to see today. Quite a hefty pile. And I was first asked to present in June of 2020, but of course that got postponed because of the pandemic. And I'd like to thank the staff for asking me, and to my husband Ken Green and great friend Jim Kohler for agreeing to be my holders and folders today. So like most of us, I grew up with two grandmothers who were quilters. My grandma Nisbel hand quilted quilts on the frame at church, did lots and lots of quilts. Now she grew up Mennonite, so she was very much no frills. The quilt that I have that she made is a white whole cloth. It looks just like a mattress pad. And a cousin of mine who lives in Omaha says she has a quilt that Grandma made that's actually pretty. But I have not yet seen that quilt. And it was really fun sewing on her treadle sewing machine. My mother also didn't quilt, but she was super creative. She sewed most of our clothing, home decor. She knitted, made weavings, did macrame, all kinds of things. I sewed clothes for my dolls when I was in elementary school, and then in junior high made most of my own clothing through junior high, high school, and on for many years. My first quilts I made with my extension club friends, and they were, for Project Minus, quilts for children who are visually impaired. So we really searched out all kinds of fabric that had great texture for those. Our extension club, the Northeast Achievers, we also embroidered and tied a bicentennial quilt that was donated. And my church group made a lot of quilts for Lutheran World Relief. In the 1970s, I made a lot of tied comforters for my family. So all total to today, I've made 30-some bed-sized quilts. I did not bring any bed-sized quilts today because they take more space. Yeah, then I needed a couple extra guys. But anyway, they take too much space. I've made about 5 of those were donated for charity, and many others were gifted to children and grandchildren. We have 6 grandchildren, 3 graduated from high school, and 3 are married, so that's 3 wedding quilts. I'm starting to work on a graduation quilt for a grandson who graduates this year. In the 1970s, my mother and I started a crafts business, and that continued with the help of friends for over 30 years. Unfortunately, my mother passed away when she was 56, but her legacy continued with our unique boutiques. So I brought a few things that I have that I made in the 70s and 80s. And Jim, if you want to take another one or 2 or 3 and you go through those real fast, these are just wall hangings that were crudely appliqued and quilted. Big theme here with the piece. And you notice that's a lot of brown. Okay, Ken says this was my brown period. Brown is not a favorite color of mine. At that time, at the boutiques, the colors that we're selling were country blue, mauve, rust. So those were the colors that I made and sold, but they were not the colors that I used in my home. And there's a couple of vests there too that you can see that the first one is actually cheater cloth, and I threw in, of course we had the bicentennial items too, and I did not bring my dress that I made for myself out of log cabin cheater fabric, or my red, white, and blue bicentennial dress and sunbonnet that my daughter and I had matching ones of when we did our boutiques during the bicentennial. So I will be showing my quilts in roughly chronological order. In the 1990s, I joined Lincoln Quilters Guild, and shortly thereafter took my first quilting class at Lopers and Beatrice, taught by Chris Wiegers. Okay, this quilt was made using a Thimbleberries pattern in their book, and it was all in the blue and rust and all that kind of stuff, and those weren't colors I really liked. So to make it mine, I used purple and black, and it worked that way too. I then had the skills to make quilts for our first grandchildren, Caitlin and Josh, that were born in 94 and 95, and I don't have their I Spy quilts. They're at their homes. They're both 27 and married. This quilt is the first of the 2 Irish chain quilts that I've made. It has very puffy batting because I didn't know any better.
Would you try to also show us the back as you rotate it?
Some of this isn't a super interesting back, but anyway, you can see my quilting. It is monofilament thread, which is not a recommended type of thread, but it just is what it is. Do you want to wait a second on that one? In 1996, Lincoln Quilters Guild members were so touched by the shooting of 16 children, these were preschoolers and their teacher, in Dunblane, Scotland, and we made angel quilts for their families, so I don't have that quilt either. The next quilt is a Carol Breyer Ballard inspired quilt with the dancers, and I did make some of the dancer quilts for especially my one granddaughter, Lizzie, who danced, so she has her own quilt.
Is that applique?
Yeah, it's applique, and kind of. My first quilts are really quilted pretty crudely. The next quilt is actually the first log cabin kind of quilt that I ever made, although it's very improvisational, and I looked and it has 5 sides. Okay, that's my first hexagon quilt, kind of almost. A real stretch of the imagination. It actually, this point goes down. It's in our staircase, so he only sees it every day, a dozen times. Okay. The next, I have a little wall hanging with a dragonfly, and then I also sold sweatshirts that had the applique motif on it too. Yeah, and then I thought it was so cool to cut off the sweatshirt. I must have been thinner at that time. That's just how I did it. Okay, and then I did several quilts that were kind of a stained glass applique type, and I know my sister-in-law is here, and I made one for her too. So that is the stained glass applique. The next quilt is
Sheila, are you doing machine quilting or hand
Yes.
quilting, or did you start with hand?
Oh, machine quilting. I can count on one hand my handwork, not much. This is a piece that I really do like, and I did sell a lot of these at the boutique. This size of the nativity scene and some smaller religious pieces. So this was a purchased panel, and then I quilted it by machine, and I hand stitched on a lot of beads, so it really catches the light. And I have this during the crisp holiday season way high up, like from the bottom of our rails, 2-story rails in the house. Okay, I joined the Ricky Timms Harmonic Convergence, aka Striptease and Caveman Quilting. Praise. I organized a big group from Lincoln Quilters Guild, and we attended a 2-day seminar in Omaha in 1999. I made table runner, a pillow, which I didn't bring today, a vest that has couched specialty threads and yarns on it. That's also the striptease method. And a number of wall hangings. This is just a few of the items that I've made. Top and bottom doesn't matter on that one.
Conflicting sides.
And he also, he was the first quilter that I recall. They came out with the curve piecing, kind of like Sherry Lynn One and some of those people are doing today. Ricky Timms, I have his tulip design. I took classes from him, well, in Omaha, the seminar, and then in Nashville at an AQS show. Okay, and I want to show, about that time, I was also making and selling a lot of jackets. And so this is one of the jackets. This particular one has a sweatshirt base. I did other rag jackets and just lots of garments. This was in the late 90s at my home boutiques. Okay. The next piece is the first of two Bargello quilts. Actually, I think I made the next one before this one. But this patriotic Bargello is really a favorite of mine. And I have inherited a number of jewelry boxes from relatives who passed away. And so that has on it, stitched onto it, are mementos of faith, of freedom, and I think a great way to use a lot of those items that would just be in a jewelry box. So at least I get it out at least once a year, like the months of June and July, and have that so that I can see it.
My Sunday school attendance.
It does have some pieces from World War I on it as well. And this is another Bargello quilt that I made. I made this for my brother, Ed Evan. And it's kind of, he worked for the Natural Resource District, so these are my NRD colors of Bargello, and that was made in 2003. Right? It says on it somewhere. 2003. Okay. So the next piece was a Fiberworks challenge piece, and kind of has some of the aesthetics of modern quilting too, but kind of crude quilting. Okay, so now we've reached the year about 2000. These are my 2000 to 2005 quilts. This quilt is from 2005. I call it My Kind of Fall. And this is one of about 4 or 5 quilts that I've made where there's no piecing. It's all fused onto the batting. Most of the fabrics in this piece and another piece I'll show you later were either hand dyed or sun printed, hand painted out on my driveway. And then what holds it together after you fuse everything together, then it's quilted. Quilted quite densely and kind of graffiti quilted. So that means I quilted in a lot of leaves and so forth on this piece. The binding is even fused. I did stitch it down later, but this also has a fused binding. So the next piece is from 2002.
She applicated right on the leaves, and then quilted it up. Okay.
Right. And quilt everything that's empty. This is a piece that I did in 2002. So my style was evolving to what we call modern quilts today. The quilting is poor by today's standards, but elements of that modern quilting aesthetic are evident. And often in my quilts, black was my negative space. The next quilt is just kind of a simple country kind of scene, which I don't do a lot of this kind of thing, but the big thing when I was growing up, when we would approach Plymouth, Nebraska, where Grandma and Grandpa lived, is who could see the church steeple first. And so that was kind of my inspiration for making that quilt. Okay, the next quilt is like my favorite in almost the whole world. This quilt I made for my niece Kristen up in Patera when she got her Master's of Architecture from UNL. Kristen was my partner in doing some sun painting with the ferns and a lot of flowers from her folks' garden. And the name of this quilt, which I can't find right now, what does it say, Ken? It's
Turning freely on a pivot.
that was a quilt show it was in. Anyway, it's called Armstrong number 5531. It is as close as I could replicate linoleum that they unearthed on their kitchen floor when we were tearing up other kitchen flooring and found this Armstrong linoleum. And I thought it was the coolest pattern ever. I still do. And honestly, my quilting, this was 2008, the quilting is not too shabby on that one. And I did use variegated thread, but that was my gift for Kristen in 2008. This quilt is a lot about travel, my love of travel, Eiffel Towers. I've made at least 10 quilts that do have the Eiffel Tower on them. My daughter has quite a few of them too. This was made from when we attended that Ricky Timms seminar. Friends, for my organizing the seminar, friends bought me some of Ricky Timms hand-dyed fabrics. And that is what I made with the Ricky Timms hand-dyed fabrics. And it's pretty heavily quilted too.
The Eiffel Tower looks somewhat goldish. Is there something you use?
I
specifically?
used metallic thread in the quilting on this piece. I really don't recommend metallic thread for quilting, but as you can see, I have used it a few times. This is another later of my pieces. It was that same harmonic convergence or striptease technique inspired by Ricky Timms. Okay. The next is a piece also inspired by travel, and we went to the Bahamas. It was part of a cruise. We went to the Adastra Gardens, and they had these trained flamingos. And so when I got home, I wanted to make flamingos. Well, I found a book that had all these half-square triangles. You could make flamingos. Well, they looked really sad. They were just sparse. And so at the same time, that snippets technique was hot. So I fused a bunch of fabric, cut it up into little like feather shapes, and ironed it on. And then when I quilted in the shape of feathers on the flamingos, and then all kinds of leaves and floral things on the green background. But that started up just a totally half square triangles. The next piece is one of my Christmas quilts, and this is an earlier one too, from prior to 2000, probably about 2010 or so. And this is a fun one that I take to the classroom when we working with children, because it's hand quilted, and that is the wind, and the kids get it. They get it really well, and they love to touch the fur and see the buttons. They're the embellishments. Okay. Get my damselfly's antennae out better. This is another of the harmonic convergence background with a damselfly on the foreground. And again, the fabric I chose for the body of the damselfly just didn't look quite right. So I fused an opalescent fabric to the cotton fabric for the body. And then it has the three-dimensional antennae.
What, like a spray? How did you fuse
No,
it?
it's fabric that you like buy for dance costumes and that kind of thing. And I fused it to the cotton fabric. The next two pieces are both also inspired by travel. Monet's Garden of Giverny, and you can do the other one too. This one, my daughter Jill did the needlepoint, the needlework, the cross stitch, I guess it is, and gave it to me. And I thought, okay, we got to make kind of a wall hanging with it. And so I added all the borders, and I quilted it actually by hand, kind of, and added all the beads. There's a whole lot of beads. When you feel the surface of that quilt, it's just tons of beads. And then I put some of my Monet fabric on the back of that one. I guess both of them I did. Okay. So the larger quilt is a quilt that I made in a class led by Lois Wilson, who's here today. And I did the squares on point. It was a watercolor technique. And both of those quilts are in my dining room, and they're really favorite quilts of mine. I was very pleased with how they turned out. Okay, the next quilt is the center panel with the elephant is from Thailand. My cousin Betsy was married on the back of an elephant in Thailand and brought this back for me. So the fabrics that are around the squares and the half square triangles that form the border, I painted over them with metallic paints, with bronze and gold and so forth, because I wanted to kind of make it look like like it went with the elephant in the center better. So I did open up the back of that elephant to see what it was padded with. It's animal hair is inside there. Really gross animal hair.
So did you leave it that way?
I stitched it back up and put it back on the quilt. I mean, the whole thing has a back on it and is quilted. This is a piece that I did for a Lincoln Quilters Guild challenge, and it reminded me of, you know, having tea at my grandma's house. And just kind of a fun little one. Also crudely quilted. So this, what's the year on that one?
2002.
2002, okay. The next piece is a piece that I did in a Robbie Joy Eclo class sponsored by Lincoln Quilters Guild. Robbie Joy was back and was our presenter last week, and she had been to Lincoln Quilters Guild in the early 2000s. And so that is a piece that I did in her class, and it's all fused also. In 2004, Michael James designed fabric for Free Spirit Fabric Company. He called it his Color Stripes line. This is his fabric and his pattern. So the fabric was sold with the stripes, Color Stripes fabric line. But the challenge was to get those stripes to line up just right. And so his studio's assistant, Leah Sorensen Hayes, helped me, gave me some tips about how I could get all my fabrics, all my stripes lined up. And so thanks to Leah, I got this quilt made, and I made another one in a different colorway that my daughter has.
After some unique vocabulary.
I really love 60-degree angles. And this is a piece that I did, and just real simple, let the value do the work. Okay, this is a favorite one for me to take into the classroom with the fourth graders. And come on. It's a workout when you do it, but when you turn it, it looks like a house of cards falling. It's a great optical illusion quilt. It works the same if you take a photo of the quilt and turn the photo. But it's more fun to actually, so you let your value do the work on this piece. The next quilt does not belong to me, it belongs to the Lincoln Quilters Guild. And in the fall of 2001, Lincoln Quilters Guild members started offering Discover Nebraska presentations in the fourth grade classrooms. It is a program that supplements the social studies curriculum. I made 3 blocks on the quilt, the arrowhead block, the church, and the center with the capital and the arrows that surround it. And then I bound the quilt and added the sleeve and the loops. 21 years and 43,000 fourth graders later, we're still sharing our love of quilting and the history of the state of Nebraska with fourth graders. Jim and Ken and Zeta, anybody else in here, are all Discover Nebraska volunteers. As well, Jean Ang was one that she and I have been with the program the longest. We basically started the program. And Jean Ang also made blocks on the quilt. Jean Davey and Jenny Welty were also early Discover Nebraska volunteers. And Mary Gormley gifted us with about 10 vintage quilts, antique quilts, quilt tops that we show to the children on a regular basis. Okay, the next one is actually a pattern. Most of the quilts I do aren't much of a pattern, but that was called early, what does it say on the front? Early? Empty nest syndrome. So this is actually a pattern. Ken has been retired for 19 years, but I made this before, you know, he thought about retiring, and it was not made to be a quilt to look like us or anything like that. But kind of a fun one, and I did add shells for embellishments and some other kind of fun things, and really tried to do some fun things with the quilting on that piece. This quilt was a result of a trip when I took my daughter and daughter-in-law to Italy for 40th birthdays, and so we have the 3 glasses of wine, kind of made in the Robbie Joy Eclo style with the fused fabrics.
Kind of makes you wonder what they did on that.
Do you have his comments written into your?
Your ad lib.
He's been with me on trips like that too. Okay, so the next quilt is not really a great quilt, but it is homage to the wonderful, wonderful interns that we have had here at the International Quilt Museum through the years. Ellen Rushman, Kristen Weber, and Madeline Roberg were 3 that particularly stand out. We had kind of an intergenerational little quilt group going on, and we each made blocks that featured the yellow, I believe, vases, and then blue background and whatever flowers we wanted, and the flowers are made out of all kinds of specialty threads and yarns and so forth, and we couch those on. Everything's machine done. In one of them, there's even fur on the top right. That's a hunk of fur there. I don't know what it's all about, but that wasn't my piece. Anyway, we cut them in 4ths in and reassembled. And so we had a good time doing that. And Ellen Rushman was a part of my Fiberworks group. The Fiberworks group was formed in 2009, and she was one of our group members. For that's not Fiberworks. Okay, the next quilt is a quilt that shows a whole lot of different surface design techniques and also features the Eiffel Tower. So I use Shiva paint sticks for the rubbings in the background. Hold it up high, please. And I even took like a statue of the Eiffel Tower, and that is a rubbing as well, the Eiffel Tower on that one. And then on the label, there's another Eiffel Tower that's a rubbing. So all kinds of things. I made this quilt because a Lincoln school gifted a book entitled Show Way to our Discover Nebraska group. And the book it perpetuated the myth of the Underground Railroad. And that bothered me a lot. LPS even brought the author of the book to Lincoln. And so I wanted to make a quilt where I could have discussion with the students, and more so really with their teachers, that the Underground Railroad is a myth. And so the front, I got, ugly fabric and old fabric from a bunch of people that I made the blocks on the front that are all described in this book. And then the back of the quilt is a map that shows the north and the south, and the rift between north and south, and then the kids have a good time finding Nebraska, which was a territory at the time. And those safety pins on there are from a doll class to show where my doll traveled. So yeah, to go to freedom, so she can get to freedom. Okay, we'll talk about Slices of Paradise now, and the last panel did not show it. I'm going to move away from Slices of Paradise is on, I pinned up to the board. It was made by a group I'm a part of called Material Girls. We made it to celebrate our 10th anniversary, so we made it in 2009. Our group formed in '99, and 24 years later, we're still meeting twice a month in homes. And the one was coming from a friend who now lives in Seward, and it goes on the far right, so it's another big tree that kind of frames it. So we saw a photograph of a resort on Bora Bora. I contacted the resort and got permission to kind of replicate it. And so we blew up the picture, cut it apart, and we didn't see what each other was doing while we were working on our slices. So we call this Slices of Paradise, Bora Bora. Okay, thank you. The next piece is another one that is fused and later sewn. It has a lot of the graffiti quilting. I even signed this one on the front, sewed my name on the front. Most of the fabrics used in this quilt were painted by niece Kristen and me on my driveway. And some of them are sun prints of the plants from my brother and sister-in-law's garden. The next quilt goes along with the teapot, the quilted teapot that's on the back table. On our first trip to Tanzania, we bought a lot of batiks. And so this is a lot of the wax batiks on the front that depict women working, and women work hard. Women build homes out of sticks, the men dance, and they tend the cattle. And among the Maasai, that's kind of it. The women really work hard. And then there's a wood block print on the back. And so this is a good one too that we take to the classrooms. In 2012, I spearheaded a project that resulted in 170 wall hangings, quilts for Japan. They were made to comfort families affected by the tsunami, earthquakes, and nuclear reactor fallout. The damselfly, it says on the back, the damselfly symbolizes courage, strength, and happiness. Our best wishes for you. Project Friendship 2012. Now Nomura was a really talented young woman. She worked, I think, for a time in collections here, and she got her doctorate here in quilt studies at the university. And she's the one that asked us to make quilts. So that was the Lincoln Quilters Guild project. The next piece is a collaborative piece done by members of Fiberworks, a group that I'm a part of that started in 2009. And this group do a lot of surface design techniques. We meet monthly, we have challenges regularly, and we exhibit our work. So our next show is at the Jewish Community Center in Omaha the month of June. So that shows each one of us has fabric in that piece. Okay.
Why is it so stiff?
It's so stiff because one person, hers is like a dictionary page, and you know, they were just techniques that were difficult to quilt, some of them. So this is just kind of a modern quilting technique. It was a fun one, a slice and insert. Okay, next. The next piece has fabrics it has commercial fabrics down the center, and then fabrics that I shibori dyed. That was a Fiberworks project. And then the stitching on this, I started to hand stitch it. My hand stitches looked so awful that I ripped them out, and I borrowed a friend's sashiko machine. So this sashiko sewing machine will do stitches that look like hand stitches, only much more perfect than anything I'd ever do. Yeah, it just has a good teeth on the back. Okay, next. I didn't bring the largest wall quilt that I've made. It's about 10 foot tall and 42 inches wide, so I didn't bring that. But this quilt I do, it's hanging, and Ken asked me how I was gonna get it back up, or how I was gonna get it down, and I said, well, I got it up there. So this is a little bit smaller piece. When Quilt Nebraska was in Seward one year, the challenge was to make a tree quilt, and it had to be exactly these dimensions. And these have hung here at the International Quilt Museum. They hung for a National Quilting Day a number of years ago. So my Fiberworks group had a challenge. We were to use the kind of the acetate plastic file folders and do something quilty with it. So it was just before then that we had like my favorite international quilt exhibit at the International Quilt Museum, Pajagi. And so I made plastic pajagi with my file folders, and then later thought that technique could be used to create leaves. I have some really large plastic pajagis I've made too that I hang in my windows at home. This one, the white plastic is disintegrating, but these pieces were made, I don't know, 12, 15 years ago, but I still love them. Okay, what do we have next? We have just kind of a fun modern quilt. This one is faced instead of bound, and it was just kind of a big plaid quilt. It was fun to do. Next. The next is a table runner that I made to match the china that's in my dining room. Okay, my china does not look like, you know, most china is white with a gold rim. My china is all these colors. And I made a wall hanging too. Next. This is another improvisational piece that at QuiltCon, I took a class from some African-American quilters, some of the G-Spin quilters, and that was the piece that resulted from that. And the next piece. Okay, faster, faster. This is just kind of an improvisational piece. It is horizontal. And just kind of a fun one. We have rails in our home. It's a 2-story entry, and so hanging from the rails that are on the 2nd floor, I like to make quilts that are about this size and that will look cool with my furniture and stuff. Next. The next piece is a sample quilt that I did in a beginning modern quilting class. I did it for Quilt Nebraska, and I've done it for some guilds too. So it has different techniques like slice and insert, stitch and flip, disappearing 9-patch, etc. The next piece was done at a class that was here at the International Quilt Museum in 2014 with quilt maker Luke Haynes. And our instructions were to bring 2 old garments, and then we did the log cabin. These are actually kind of log cabin blocks. The next piece is a piece that I did for a Fiberworks challenge. Features a dove. I took hand-dyed fabric, cut it up into 60-degree diamonds, reassembled to form a gradation, and then made my dove and covered it with cheesecloth. So that's why it's kind of wispy. And then it has a Picasso decorator print fabric on the back.
Should maybe you use a long arm on your quilts?
Oh, I don't have a long arm, no.
You just do domestic?
I have a Bernina domestic machine. I think it's a 750. It has the deeper throat, so it makes it easier. This is a piece also that was done for a Fiberworks challenge, and the challenge was closure. And so this has zippers sewn into the binding all the way around. And this is probably the most densely quilted quilt that I've made. So it has matchstick quilting. Matchstick quilting is the parallel lines, and those are probably a 1/16 of an inch or less apart. The next quilt is one of, I think, 6 or so that have been kind of this sea glass look. The first one I made for my nephew's baby, and in living in California. Then I made this one for myself, and it's quilted kind of wavy-like. Made one for my daughter and one for myself in kind of an orange colorway to see how that would work. And then finally, I did a queen-size quilt for my granddaughter Lizzie and her husband Chad for a wedding gift. Next. This piece was also done in a workshop I took here at the International Quilt Museum, and this was with Sheila Frampton Cooper. And she is a really wonderful quilter, learned some really interesting piecing techniques. Next. Yoshiko Jinsenzi has had a lot of exhibitions here at the Quilt Museum, or quilts in different exhibitions at the museum, as well as one that was exclusively her work and was here for a class. So I did this. This is not my class piece, but this is one inspired by her. This is kind of a different one because it has a sheer, kind of a drapery sheer fabric over the other fabric. And I did that because I wanted a little bit of a distorted look. And you're showing, okay, yeah. And that has IKEA fabric on the back as well. This is another piece that I did. It's very densely matched. It, yeah, goes kind of like that. Matchstick quilting with variegated threads. So that
it kind of catches the light cool because your eye kind of moves around trying to see the different colors. The next piece is also was inspired by Yoshiko Jinsenzi, and on this piece, I took IKEA decorator fabric and cut it up, and I really love this piece too in the way that it's kind of quilted wavy-like. And then the fabric on the back side of this piece is IKEA decorator fabric too. The next piece is one of just 2 or 3 that I've done that are kind of about social issues. So the name of this quilt is called Trauma Now. And our Dr. Joshua Corse's shoes tell the story of Orlando Pulse nightclub's massacre, really, on June 12, 2016. Dr. Corse had finished his 24-hour rotation, then the Trauma Now sound alarm sounded, and that is all writing. The entire background of the quilt is text. It is the article from the Orlando Sentinel newspaper, the text of Dr. Corse's Facebook post, which really became viral, and the names of the shooter and the 49 victims are all named there. I went to Goodwill and bought scrubs, and so the green, that's the binding, and the bottom, that's all scrubs. And then I tried to make blood. Okay, really quick. Cyanotypes are, Jim, if you want to hold 2 and you can just whip them out here. Yeah, so I've taught several printmaking 101 classes, a number of them here at the museum, some for like Quilt, Nebraska and other places. Whoa! So just show the cyanotypes really quickly. These also show other printmaking techniques of monoprinting and rubbings. And they're just, I really got addicted with it. The next piece he's going to show the entire, honey, it's sideways. No. The entire background of this quilt is monoprinted onto that sheer drapery fabric and then fused to the cotton fabric, and the binding as well is the same stuff. Yeah, it's just because we are out of here. No. Yeah, that's right. Okay, another one really good. This one has a lot of different fabrics. It has the border, it's the fabric that I sun printed with Kristen on my driveway that we did. And then it has, I took a shibori class from a grad student who now lives in Minnesota, Barbara, and it has that in it and just a big variety of techniques, more mono printing and so forth. And this is a quilt that I made. I call it Make It Modern. So you start with the traditional quilt block, slice it up, sew it back together. You might want to add some more negative space, and anyone can make a modern quilt. So I've done this at Quilt, Nebraska, as well as for the Modern Guild, the Rock Creek Guild in Fairbury and Fremont. This is a large, heavy quilt that is string pieced, and it's probably the heaviest one that I brought. But it was inspired by a quilt from Tara Fangen, and it was that I saw at one of the quilt cons. And this is a quilt that I made in about 2004 or 5. I chaired the Peak at Christmas at the Lux Center for the Arts a couple of years, and this was one of the quilts that I made and sold, and it was purchased by our very own Joanna Baxter, and so she took it off her wall to show us today. So don't put that in with my quilts. Yeah, I could. This is a Chihuly inspired piece done for a Fiberworks challenge, that piece, and the next large monoprinted piece will hang at the Jewish Community Center. And, so much of quilting is sharing with the community. So I have made raffle quilts for Habitat for Humanity, Special Olympics, a breast cancer fundraiser, quilts for an adoption agency, for Boys and Girls Club, and for Habitat, a lot for Habitat. We make wall hangings for each new Habitat homeowner. We just had a dedication this last weekend of a new Habitat home. So during the pandemic, when PPE was so hard to find, I formed the group Lincoln COVID Sewists, and I got some of my sewists here in the audience. 110 sewists made over 34,000 face masks and surgical scrub caps and hospital gowns. And this project, the last donation was made February 15th of this year. So that project went 23 months of constantly making kits, having kits at my door, measuring elastic and everything. So this is a quilt that I've had a lot of my sewists sign. I made 2 giant quilts that I call Mask Up. One is in the collection here at the International Quilt Museum, and it's quite a large quilt. It's 55 inches by 118 inches, and then also made one for History Nebraska. And the quilt that is here at the International Quilt Museum will be shown at Threads Across Nebraska in October, which is really cool. So there's brochures on the table. At Threads Across Nebraska, 15% of the proceeds does come back here to the Quilt Museum. And my quilt's on the front, and then I will be the featured quilter for Threads. So if you haven't seen enough of my quilts here, come on out to Threads. I have to show my dolly, a few of my dolly quilts too. This is cheater cloth, and that is to go with the doll Samantha, the cheater cloth that is the crazy quilt pattern. And then to go with the doll Addie from the 1860s, I have my reconciliation cheater cloth. And then the other little quilt would be 1934, the doll's Kit and Ruthie. And I have done 36 unique My Doll and I classes here at the International Quilt Museum, and they all coordinate with an exhibition at the museum and a doll. And it's all about that time period or that country. Even the snacks, everything coordinates. And so that is a real joy for me to do those doll classes. I've had, 673 children have attended my classes in these 36 unique classes since 2009. And so to me, that is what it's all about. It's sharing our love of quilting and history with that next generation, which we also do through Discover Nebraska. So, thanks for inviting me. A huge thank you. I've got more jackets and vests and everything. Okay, we have a few more minutes until the start of the volunteer meeting.
The jacket that I have on is a whole cloth quilted, it's channel quilted jacket. And it's IKEA fabric. This is more vintage. This is about 20 years ago I made the kind of red coats. Recently I constructed this vest out of some strip sets with a 45-degree angle. And then my most recent finish, Lincoln Modern Quilt Guild has B groups. So my B is a group of 5. And we make quilt blocks for each other. And I don't need another wall hanging. And so I had it figured out that I would have them make these strip sets with a 45-degree angle, which I then made into a jacket. So I provided some of the fabrics for them, and then they used some of their own fabrics. But
I thought you missed the A group.
I did not miss the egg.
So I invite you to look at the three-dimensional objects that I have back on the table. I have a teapot that I made for a friend for her birthday, who accompanied me on that trip to Tanzania, our first trip to Tanzania. I have a quilted bowl. The quilted house was made for a Lincoln Quilters Guild quilt show. Zita, you've got a quilted house too, I'm sure, at home. And then those quilted flowers were made with a special type of batting that after you get your quilt sandwich together, when it is exposed to a hot hair dryer or a heat gun, it will shrivel up kind of and get really firm. So those are really fun to do, the fabric flowers. Does anyone have any questions or?
What is that?
The batting that is called that shrinks up is Foss shape, F-O-S-S-H-A-P-E, Foss shape.
Is that online?
Yes, it's only available online. I have not seen it locally. Anything else? Yep.
What was a cheater cloth?
Cheater cloth. Cheater cloth is cloth that is printed to look like patchwork. So cheater cloth could be log cabin pattern. It could be just, like take a picture of a quilt and then send it to Spoonflower and you've made your own cheater cloth, I guess. Right, Carolyn?
Yeah.
So cheater cloth is very, very interesting because I thought cheater cloth was maybe like from the 50s or something like that. But when we have 3 quilts that belong in the museum's collection that are all cheater cloth. And the little quilt that I showed you that looked like a crazy quilt, this is a reproduction of the original crazy quilt cheater. And somewhere here I have the year that they started doing cheater cloth in the 1850s, which is way different. And this cheater cloth, that the 3 in our collection, one is a doll quilt donated by Mary Gormley, and then the other 2 are bed-size quilts. And I'm not grabbing here what year that fabric was made. Do you know, Carolyn? It was in the 1870s, I want to say.
Crazy quilt probably would have been more 1890s, don't you think?
Okay.
1880s.
I have it written here. I have the manufacturer written down, but of course I can't find that exact date. But yeah, cheater cloth is nothing new, so it's been used for years and years and years. So thank you again. Yes.
But you most of your fabrics look like they're hand dyed. Do you hand dye a lot of fabrics?
I do hand dye some fabrics, not a lot. You can also purchase beautiful hand dyed fabrics that others have dyed, but I have done some. That's not, it takes a lot of time and space, and so there's different ways to get it. You can purchase it. So. But again, thank you very much for coming today.